Namibia, in the southwest of Africa, is twice as big as Germany, but sparsely populated. It is home to just 2 million people. 100 years ago, Southwest Africa was a German colony. Evidence of this can still be found in the capital, Windhoek. Namibia has become a dream destination for tourists. But for decades, this country was in the grip of an inhuman regime. A look back at the 1970s. Namibia was an occupied country. The large neighbour, South Africa, had implemented apartheid, racial segregation, in Namibia too. The liberation movement SWAPO, Southwest Africa People's Organization, was rebelling against this. Resistance to the apartheid regime was brutally suppressed. Many Namibians fled to neighbouring Angola. Life there was wretched and dangerous. In addition, South Africa was bombing the refugee camps. The East German leader Erich Honecker offered SWAPO help. From 1979, East Germany took in more than 400 Namibian refugee children. The plan was to give the children an education, including a university education, so that they could later return to Namibia and form an elite. But in 1989, East Germany collapsed. The Berlin Wall came down, and Erich Honecker and his regime disappeared from the political map. While the citizens of East Germany were finally free, nobody wanted anything to do with the Namibian children anymore. Germany was busy celebrating. The children had grown into teenagers, now 15 and 16. They were handed back to Namibia more or less overnight, without any publicity. At the same time, South Africa too was undergoing an historic change. The freedom fighter Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Apartheid was abolished. South Africa ended the occupation of Namibia. The Namibian teenagers from East Germany came back to a free country in 1990. This was to be their new home, but it was a foreign country to them. They spoke almost only German. They thought in German, and everyone called them the Germans. One of these Germans is Tuka Mwatile, now 35. We're meeting him in the Namibian provincial town of Gobabis. He only spends the weekends here. During the week, he has work in the capital, Windhoek. But Tuka's family live in Gobabis.
My wife is a teacher here, and she lives here. In her free time, she has to look after the girls. I come every weekend to visit my family. My son also lives here with my wife. That's why I come.
Many children whose parents live in rural Namibia spend the entire school year in boarding school. It's Sunday afternoon. Tuka is getting ready to leave for his working week in Windhoek. Tuka and his wife Sanet are glad they both have a job. With unemployment at almost 50%, it can't be taken for granted. For that, they're willing to accept a weekend relationship. Since Tuka grew up in East Germany, he doesn't speak any African language. He only speaks German and English. His family is multilingual.
My wife and children speak English and Afrikaans, and we speak English with each other. I also speak English to my son.
He doesn't speak Afrikaans?
I understand it, but I can't speak it. But we get by with our languages. It's okay. It's bilingual.
She can understand German?
Only a little. Yeah, I can understand, but the speaking, nothing.
For Tuka's family, Germany, where he grew up, is a distant, mysterious country.
I would say a German mostly, because of his temper. And the way he was brought up is really not like us Namibians. He's more sophisticated, more stylish.
Thank you.
Yeah, but just different than us Namibians, the way we were brought up. So it's not really Namibian.
To this day, he's an outsider, even though this is meant to be Tuka's home and Namibia his home country.
Last week, only 1 week then.
Sanette feels how torn her husband is. Tuka is proud he can afford a Volkswagen Golf. It's a piece of Germany in Africa. He is in constant email contact with a friend whose situation he greatly envies. This friend lives in Berlin. Mateus Nangolo is also from Namibia. He too is one of the children who were brought to East Germany and suddenly sent back to Africa in 1990. But for the past 10 years, Mateus has been living in Germany again, now with his own family. Since he is married to Steffi, a German citizen, Mateus is allowed to live in Germany too. By now they have 3 children. Josie is the eldest. The children were born in Germany, but their parents met in Namibia. Steffi was working in Windhoek as a teacher at a German school.
We laid eyes on each other, and it was done.
Yes, it was love at first sight.
It isn't just German and African culture that have come together in this family. Mateus has already had an eventful life with many changes. He witnessed major political events from close up.
Would you like me to tell you how I was brought to East Germany? That was in 1979. I was 4 or 5 at the time. I came here without my mother. Everyone came without parents. Okay, some had their parents with them, but my mother stayed in Namibia. My mother stayed behind because I was sent to Germany to go to school. I grew up in a boarding school and a home. There was no room for my mother.
Only a few photographs of those days in Mateus's life survive. The big school was a completely alien world for the 5- and 6-year-olds from Africa.
My mother prepared me. She kept telling me for what felt like an eternity that I was to be sent overseas. I remember thinking, overseas? Am I going to the ocean?
On today's menu, pumpkin soup. It's one of Mateus's favourite meals. He got it a lot in the German boarding school. For the starving refugee children from the Angolan camps, East Germany was like the promised land. Together with his wife Steffi and their 3 children, Mateus wants to go in search of the places of his German childhood, to the place where he ate pumpkin soup as a young boy. The trip into the past takes them to the country north of Berlin. In the small town of Güstrow, they are meeting 2 old acquaintances, Paul and Reni.
Reni is my old teacher. I've known her since grade 1. And Paul is her husband, who I've known just as long. We often used to visit her at home. She always took the children home. We all got a turn. She wanted us to know family life.
At the time, Mateus was as old as his own children are today. Upon their arrival in Güstrow, a small surprise is waiting for Matthäus. His teacher from the boarding school has come to say hello. Matthäus still calls her Mama.
Hallo. Ja, ich wusste gar nicht, dass zum Bahnhof kommt. Ja. Ich will euch ja wenigstens abholen, ne? Ja.
Some parts of Güstrow still look like the old East Germany. Time seems to have stood still here. The African children used to go to this school. The Namibian children were basically given a new identity. Matthäus and Irene Odzuk, as well as his former primary school teacher Renny, remember the educational measures of those days.
Guck mal, das ist Papas Schule. Und du kommst auch bald zur Schule.
When I arrived, half a year had already gone by, and you were down here. You were there for a whole year. The entire class was difficult. They were isolated from the others. They were very disruptive and loud. Some of them climbed out the windows. They had to be isolated.
I think most of them were traumatized and had problems. Their parents weren't there, and we had all been wild in Angola too.
Was he one of the rebels?
I was the commander, the class rep. That required me to be very disciplined.
Dazu gehört auch, dass man sehr diszipliniert ist.
To this day, his old teacher calls him Matthäus Nganekwa, his other first name, which he had found in his papers when he arrived. The boy was even allocated a birthday, since his actual date of birth was unknown.
Ich weiß noch. Meine Bank war ungefähr hier so. Ich habe warte, ja, so ungefähr hier war meine Bank. Jetzt weiß ich gar nicht mehr, wer vor mir saß.
Aber der Raum an sich hat sich nicht verändert.
Nee.
Nein, hat sich nicht
Heller geworden.
Nein, heller
Das Gelb.
Ja.
Impressions of a childhood as a non-white person in East Germany. Little Ifimbo has many questions for his father, Matthäus.
Nee, meine Mutter war nicht da.
Matthäus tells Ifimbo his mother wasn't here with him in Germany. She stayed behind in Angola. Did he dream, Ifimbo wants to know. Yes, Matthäus tells him. When he thought about something, he didn't pay attention to what was going on around him and started daydreaming, he said.
Wenn ich an etwas gedacht habe, dann habe ich nicht aufgepasst und habe so vor mich hingeträumt.
Did he stare out of the window? Ifimbo asks. Yes, Matthäus confirms. He did that a lot.
Aus dem Fenster geguckt.
Irene Odzuk remembers what the students from Africa were supposed to learn here.
They had some sense of being a group because they all came from refugee camps. We wouldn't have been able to replace the home, but we did want to give them a sense of family. We also wanted to instill in them the life motto that they could achieve something if they worked hard for it.
We were told we had to learn so we could become good SWAPO fighters. Then everything changed. We had to learn to build our country and become engineers and doctors and pilots and lawyers. It all changed over time.
His time at school in East Germany evidently shaped Matthäus.
Matthäus is East German. School is about punctuality and discipline. He also has an African side. He's not just African because of his skin color. But it's evident he was socialized in Germany.
She thinks they were given a sense of order. They pack everything tidily. A walk along the outskirts of Berlin. This is where the Namibian children lived in the boarding school in the former aristocratic palace. Now it is in private hands once again, which is why we're not allowed to film inside. At the time, Matthäus and his classmates were isolated but privileged, almost like East German state guests.
Die Kinder wurden hier sehr gut versorgt.
The children were very well looked after here. They always had just as many clothes as other children. And they definitely had enough to eat. At first, it was a bit difficult because the children were so starved. They put food away so they would have something for hard times, until they realized they'd be given enough to eat every day.
The excursion to the past ends at teacher Irene Odzuk's home. Just like more than 20 years ago, she brings out chocolate milk and cake. The Namibian children in East Germany were 6 or 7 at the time. Sometimes they were even allowed to be here for an entire weekend. Instead of staying in the boarding school, they could be with a proper family.
They knew I wasn't just the strict teacher who demanded them to work. They knew I was loving too. We brought them to the toilet. My husband carried them down the stairs at night, for example, because we didn't have a bathroom upstairs. We created trusting relationships. That always stayed the same, especially with Inganekwa and his friend Tuka.
Tuka now works for a large bank in Windhoek. It could be said he has made something of himself. Because he speaks good German, he takes care of the German bank accounts. He would love to live with Matthäus in Germany. They only get to see each other every few years these days. Tuka has finished work and wants to show us what it was like when they arrived back in Africa in 1990. Their East German education was stopped overnight when they were 15 or 16. Some got a new opportunity in this smart place. A fancy address in Windhoek's Church Street, home to a private German secondary school. White farmers who had the money sent their children here. Tuka was in luck. A German family sponsored him and he was able to go to school here. Once again, he was part of a minority. Everywhere they went, the East German children felt out of place. In the German private school, they were the black children, and in the city, they couldn't communicate with anyone as they only spoke German.
They said this is our home, but it wasn't our home. We grew up in Germany. We knew Germany better than Namibia. That's why it was all so foreign to us here. We were born in Namibia, so it's our home in that sense, but we considered Germany our home.
How does he feel today?
I quite like it here. I like the sun. But if I had the chance, I'd go back. For me, everything is much nicer in Germany. The forests.
Matthäus says the opposite. He'd like to return to Namibia.
I miss all of it. The weather, the snow, the forests, Christmas with snow, everything.
Germany remains the dream destination. But we're on our way to Katatura with Tuka. This was the only part of Windhoek blacks were allowed to live during the apartheid era. This area is still poor. Here in Katatura, the East German children were simply dropped off 20 years ago. The place where a primary school now stands was once the location of a kind of reception camp. Tuka hasn't been back since that time, and it's bringing back memories.
I think we were here for a week or 2. We were only in here. We never went out. I can't remember very well. We were still in shock. We were brought here in a bus, and we were angry and disappointed.
All of the children, all of the young people were only allowed to bring back a single box of possessions from Germany. At this time, a transitional government was in place in Namibia. Under chaotic conditions, people tried to find the stranded children's relatives. Some were just never found.
When we were here, a few children left every day. If you're left over, if you're the last, it's not a good feeling. If you're an orphan and someone is picked up and you're last, you really don't feel great.
Even today, Tuka becomes insecure, almost helpless in this place. After a protected life in East Germany, he was suddenly supposed to find his way in this foreign African country. We've agreed to meet Tuka the next day after he finishes work, this time in the park of Windhoek. Tuka wants to look for Nick, another East German child. Nick hasn't been able to cope with this to and fro in life. He's unemployed and homeless. After 11 years in East Germany, he doesn't feel at home anywhere anymore.
Da ist der Nick, ja. Da ist er. Nick! Nick, komm mal. Oh, Nick.
Hallo.
Alles klar.
Wie geht's?
Alles gut, alles
in Ordnung?
Ja,
lange Zeit, Alter.
Deine Freundin.
Ja.
Sometimes Tuka gives his brother, as the East German children call each other, some money. He can't do anything else. The park idyll is deceptive. These people are desperately poor, and after just a few minutes, our camera team is being threatened badly. We have to leave. Tuka can afford a small flat on the outskirts of Windhoek, but nevertheless, the story is still having its effects on him.
We feel like people abandoned us. We were angry, and most of us still are. If you don't get out of that, if you're not able to forgive, you could end up like Nick. You have to be able to forgive. If you bottle up all that anger, it'll break you.
Has he forgiven?
I'm trying. They treated us badly. Everybody makes mistakes. You just have to get on with your life.
Forgiveness for the politicians who brought about German unity. They wanted the Namibian children out of their country as quickly as possible to forget the whole thing.
That's Matthäus. I think they've even got a new flat in Berlin. That's a big Christmas tree in the background.
Would he like to change places with him when he sees this?
Yes, I'd love to celebrate Christmas in Germany. He's lucky.
Tuka thinks his friend Matthäus must be happy to still be in Germany. He can live in Berlin because he's married to a German woman. But Matthäus also feels some bitterness when he thinks about being brought back to Namibia from reunified Germany.
I
was dropped like a hot potato. There was no stability. Afterwards, I realized that it was a big project, and nobody felt responsible for it anymore.
Matthäus took longer to find his way after he returned to the now reunified Germany. Now he works as a carer in an old people's home.
Guten Morgen. Ich bin der Matthäus.
Ja, Linz, ich bin der Schwiegersohn. Nicht?
Sie ist neu, ne?
Ja, ganz neu, am Sonnabend reingekommen.
Guten Morgen. Ich bin der Matthäus.
Ja, angenehm.
Ja.
Gehört habe ich schon von dir.
Ja?
Ja.
He is gentle with the old and demented people. He doesn't let on that the young African has already gone through a lot in life himself.
Ja?
But there is one last reservation. Matthäus can't imagine yet fully arriving in Germany.
Meine Kinder sind deutsch.
My children are German. My wife is German. I'm Namibian.
Also viele Freunde haben
Many friends have said it's just a piece of paper.
machst dir doch das Leben leichter, wenn
Life's simpler if you
das Leben
have
ist doch
German
einfacher, wenn du die
citizenship.
deutsche Staatsbürgerschaft hast. Ich habe gesagt, ja, ihr habt schon recht, aber ich habe
But I feel, with some pride, that my nationality is Namibian.
von Nationalität her Namibier.
Only few of the Namibian children in East Germany were able to return like Matthäus. Most of them live in Namibia. They were nothing but a footnote in Germany's reunification history.